Spain's worst train crash in 4 decades. At least 80 people, that's more than a third of the passengers, are killed. A scene of devastation last night. More than 100 people are injured. Today, search and rescue teams have gone from carriage to carriage. Spanish police have put the train driver under formal investigation. Also tonight. An economy on the mend, so says George Osborne after Britain's GDP growth rate doubles. Welby versus Wonga. The Archbishop takes on the payday moneylender and vows to put them out of existence.
And we salute you, Helen Glover and Heather Stanning, Olympic champions here.
Why Olympic victory hasn't led to a gold rush for sport. A special report on how corporate backers are moving on. So how have you been sleeping? It's not the heat, it could have been the moon that's keeping you awake.
On BBC London, an Olympic boost for the East End. The Mayor announces millions of pounds worth of investment. And the teenager killed in a case of mistaken identity. Police offer a £20,000 reward.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC's News at 6. One of the drivers of the train that derailed in northwestern Spain last night has been put under formal investigation. Officials will be looking at all the evidence, including some shocking trackside video, part of which we will show you. At least 80 people are now confirmed dead and nearly twice that number are injured. Christian Fraser is at the scene for us. Christian.
George, thank you. The death toll has been rising here through the day. This is now officially the worst train disaster in Spain for 70 years. But how did it happen? Well, a source close to the investigation has confirmed tonight that the train was going too fast. But what speed it was travelling at and why it seemingly broke a speed limit that was in place on that bend, that is part of the official investigation.
An 8-carriage express train, tossed and turned with such violent force that some wagons were ripped in two. Since early morning, the cranes have been lifting the wreckage piece by piece. The investigators have begun their painstaking work, and already a theory is emerging. The film we're about to show you is the moment of impact taken by a trackside camera as the train approaches the bend. A warning, it is distressing to watch. You'll see that as the train hits the bend, the middle carriages buckle and tip. Inside were 218 passengers. Some were thrown out of the train as it hit the retaining wall. Their bodies were covered with blankets last night as firemen began a desperate search for survivors, smoke still pouring from one of the upturned carriages.
The
train was going very fast and it derailed as it was going around the corner. It's a disaster. I was very lucky we survived. I don't know how many dead there are, but there are many.
Dios mío, el día de Santiago! The train was approaching the cathedral city of Santiago de Compostela. Officials described the crash site as a difficult bend with a speed limit of 50 miles an hour. But local reports say when the trapped driver radioed his control room, he told them he'd been travelling at 120. The service was running 5 minutes late, fueling one theory they were trying to make up time. 131 survivors were transferred to the local hospitals. Jose Diaz from Cadiz told me he was searching for 2 friends. 3 others from the same group are dead.
I'm here with the daughter of one of my friends who was killed. It's been a long night. The most difficult part is when they bring the news. It's generally bad.
The doctors have warned that so serious as some of the injuries they're treating, the death toll, currently at 80, will probably rise again.
Throughout the day, the families of the dead and the missing have been waiting inside this building for news with the help of doctors and the Red Cross. And every now and again, through these open windows, we can hear the screams of despair. It has been, for some, a very long wait. We're told the police are removing clothing and personal effects from the dead and bringing them to the families in the hope they can speed up the identification process. The Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy was born in Santiago. On his visit to the site this morning, he declared 3 days of national mourning.
At the moment, 2 investigations are being carried out. One is the judicial investigation, and the other one is by the Commission of Investigation of Train Accidents. The aim is to find the causes of this terrible accident accurately and as soon as possible.
A state judge has now been appointed to lead the inquiry. Was it human or mechanical error that caused this carnage? It's the driver and the black box recorder that have the answer. Christian Fraser, BBC News, Santiago de Compostela.
Well, as Christian Fraser was saying, investigators are bound to look at the speed at which the train was travelling before it derailed, and the black box, which records data about the journey, has, as Christian was saying, been recovered. Our transport correspondent Richard Westcott reports.
What's caused this crash? Well, there are some obvious questions for investigators. Was this train travelling at double the speed limit around a tight bend? What safety measures were fitted? And why didn't they work? This footage, taken on a different day, appears to show the same bend from yesterday's accident. It's thought the train approached at nearly 120 miles an hour. Right now, investigators are focusing on speed. Now, the bulk of this line is built for trains travelling up to 160 miles an hour, so it tends to be very straight. But at the point of the crash, the train joins a more conventional, slower line, which includes this tight curve here. Now, here the speed drops right down to about 50 miles an hour. Typically, these trains are fitted with a variety of safety systems, and it's these devices that could be key to the cause of this crash.
One of the questions which will be being investigated now is, did that system work? Did it tell the driver what the speed limit was, and then, for instance, the driver somehow ignored it? Or did the system fail and, in fact, either give no indication or an incorrect indication? And obviously this is what we're waiting to find out.
The crash footage is shocking, but it will also reveal significant clues for investigators.
This footage provides us with a really interesting point. The second and third carriages starting to tip. So what this means is, A, the train is going too fast. So when we get the black box, we'll be able to see what that speed was and where the failure was. The other option is potentially there could have been a failure between the carriages and the train itself. So as the speed increases, the train is tipping over, if you like. It's too fast for the track.
Ultimately, it shouldn't be hard to work out what's caused this crash. The drivers survived, and there's evidence from the black box. Spain leads the world in high-speed trains, and until now, they've had an excellent safety record. Richard Westcott, BBC News.
Christian, the authorities seem to be moving very, very quickly into this investigation.
Yes, and I think they're assisted, George, by this video that we've seen in my report. Obviously, it gives them vital clues as to what went wrong and at what point along the bend. We've had a statement in the last few minutes from the rail operator Renfe and the track operator Adif, who say they're continuing to proceed to repair and regain use of the railway as soon as possible. Both companies say they're collaborating with the investigation to clarify the causes of the accident. Meanwhile, George, as you may be able to hear from the murmur around me, there are hundreds of people up here on the embankment who are quietly observing and have been throughout the day. They were supposed to be celebrating their fiesta tonight, an annual fiesta in honour of the Apostle St James. That has been cancelled, and instead their prayers and thoughts are focused on this site behind me.
All right, Christian, thank you very much. Thank you. The rate of growth in the UK economy is picking up. Between April and June, it grew by 0.6%. That's double the rate in the previous 3 months. Official figures showed that it is the first time in 3 years that all sectors of the economy grew together. Our economics editor, Stephanie Flanders, has been taking a closer look at the figures.
It's not full speed ahead, but Britain's recovery is speeding up. And for once, everything's moving in the same direction. The ONS thinks we produced 0.6% more in the past 3 months than in the previous quarter, so our national output is 1.4% higher than it was 12 months ago. That's the fastest growth since 2011.
The numbers today are better than forecast. I think Britain is holding its nerve. We're sticking with our economic plan. The economy is on the mend, but we've still got a long way to go as we move from rescue to recovery.
Trevor Finn runs the biggest chain of car dealers in the country. Sales of cars crashed long before the rest of the economy, back in 2007. But now the news is good.
Sales have increased by 20% this year, so it speaks for itself that there's more optimism, consumers are feeling more comfortable, all the data that's coming through on unemployment is looking positive, and really that's the thing I think people think about the most when it comes to making a big purchase decision.
Cheap money is playing a part in all this. 80% of cars sold at these showrooms are bought on credit. You might think that sounds a bit familiar. After the crisis, the government was hoping this recovery would be more balanced, more driven by businesses investing and exporting overseas. But so far, nearly all the growth we've had has been from all of us spending more and saving less. The Chancellor will be hoping that's about to change. Overall, our economy is still 3.3% smaller than it was when we went into recession. But the services side of the economy, things like retail, is very nearly back to where it was at the start of 2008. Manufacturers haven't made up nearly as much ground, and construction output is more than 16% below where it was. Neil Westwood got backing from Dragon's Den to start his company, selling portable whiteboards, just as the recession hit. His sales are rising too, but until now he hasn't been confident enough to invest the £500,000 he has sitting in the bank.
Well, we've been quite conservative because we didn't know what was going to happen with the economy, but it's very sort of stable and predictable at the moment. So we're gaining confidence, and that's why we're going to take on more apprentices in September.
The Shadow Chancellor has been in Washington talking to US policymakers about the recipe for inclusive growth, something he doesn't think we've got.
We've got a long way to go to make sure this recovery is really strong and sustained and secure and is actually delivering rising living standards. This is no time for complacency from the Chancellor. He needs to do more to strengthen the recovery, but to make sure he actually delivers for working families.
The Chancellor spent last night on the night shift with workers in the Midlands. He knows that many of us have yet to feel the effects of this recovery, but at least it is now moving quite a bit faster. Stephanie Flanders, BBC News.
Well, our political editor Nick Robinson is with me now. Nick, these are decent numbers, but George Osborne is hardly boasting about them, is he?
He's not. He's always been very careful, the Chancellor, not to tell people things are going well and for them to shout back at him, not where I'm sitting, they're not. But if you listen to the way his language has changed, that phrase on the mend, he also talked at one point of optimism. That in public is the equivalent of the Chancellor in private dancing a little jig. I mean, they really believe in the Treasury that not only is this a sustainable recovery, one with momentum, it's across all sectors too. They think, in other words, a corner has been turned. Labour, of course, very quick to point out, we've seen people's earnings not increase in line with inflation. There has been a big long-term squeeze on people's incomes, in other words. So the test now is really whether that growth, that figure that frankly no one talks about down the dog and duck GDP, is that reflected in how people feel in their wallets, how they feel in their purses? Does it really feel different?
All right, Nick, thanks very much. Thank you. A former SAS sniper, Danny Nightingale, has been sentenced to 2 years of military detention, suspended for 12 months for illegally possessing a pistol and ammunition. It's the second time the soldier had appeared in court for the offence. His first conviction provoked a public campaign which led to the guilty verdict being quashed. 2 nurses who worked at the scandal-hit Stafford Hospital have been struck off after being found guilty of misconduct. Tracy White and Sharon Turner were found to have falsified waiting times in the accident and emergency unit. They're the first nurses to be punished by the Nursing and Midwifery Council as a direct result of the scandal at Stafford. Well, our correspondent Sophie Hutchinson is outside the hearing. What evidence did the council hear, Sophie?
Well, the council heard evidence from both the nurses, also some of their referees as well, and some who spoke against them. But these were 2 senior nurses who were working in the A&E department at Stafford Hospital right at the height of its failings. And there they lied about waiting time records, and they got others to do the same. The panel here said that they coerced and frightened more junior staff to do the same. And in addition, Turner racially abused accused Asian doctors. She called them Osama's mate and suicide bombers. And White chided a frail old lady who was a patient at the hospital just a day before she died. Now, the disciplinary panel here told the nurses they made achieving statistical targets their aim when they should have put patients first. They're now expelled from the nursing profession forever.
All right, Sophie, thanks very much. Thank you. The Church of England is to go head-to-head with the payday moneylender Wonga. In one of his boldest moves since becoming the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby has said the Church will compete with Wonga and put it out of existence. Ed Thomas reports.
Well, if there's one thing we've all learned at Wonga, it's how to move quickly.
When the banks say no, it's payday lenders like Wonga that say yes. It offers quick cash with interest rates of more than 1,000%. But now it's been warned by an unlikely would-be competitor. The Archbishop of Canterbury told Wonga's owner, Errol Damelin, "We're not trying to legislate you out of existence, we're trying to compete you out of existence."
This is about good management. It's also about combating exploitation. I don't see what's wrong with the Church getting involved in that.
Know your membership number?
And this is how the Church of England plans to compete with Wonga, by joining with credit unions, not-for-profit money lenders with low interest rates.
I prefer to come to the credit union because it's more friendly to ordinary people.
Well, what's wrong with the payday lenders? What's wrong with them?
They only want your money, they're not interested in you.
Over 33 weeks on a £300 loan, it's £23.
And this credit union is seeing more and more people needing help.
At the moment, there's people in so much debt, and hopefully we can help get them out of some of the debt that they're involved in.
But why can't they go to payday lenders?
The interest rate that they pay back is astronomical.
This plan is ambitious, to create hundreds of credit unions around churches, people coming to places of trust to borrow money. But there's still a long way to go before the Church of England can rival payday lenders like Wonga. That's because it's one of the biggest lenders in an industry worth £2 billion a year. And Wonga says 9 out of 10 of its customers, like Ian William Craig, are happy.
They've always managed to give it to me between like 15 and 20 minutes. They've always given me the sum that I've asked for. There's been no quibblings over it. It's been, a very positive experience so far.
You're up your trolley, Earl.
We still don't know how the Church of England can compete with this, but Wonga says it welcomes the extra choice for consumers. Ed Thomas, BBC News, Manchester.
And the time is very nearly 18 minutes past 6. Our top story this evening. The number of people killed in one of the worst train crashes in Spanish history has risen to 80, with more than 140 injured. And still to come, we'll be live from Rio de Janeiro as the Pope tells residents of a city slum not to give up hope.
Later on BBC London News, fears for the future of Smithfield Market. Conservationists call on the government to block redevelopment plans. And unearthing London's past, the community archaeologists helping to make way for Crossrail.
Tomorrow marks a year since the start of the London Olympics, and the Stratford Stadium has now sold out again for the anniversary games. Last year's event attracted an estimated £1 billion in corporate support and sponsorship for British Olympic sports. But one of the people who masterminded the games, Sir Keith Mills, has told the BBC that many of these deals have not been renewed, and even the most high-profile sports are struggling to find backers. Our sports editor David Bond has the story.
If London 2012 taught us anything, it's that the British public has a huge appetite for world-class sport. This is Eton Dorney 1 year on, and the crowds are back in big numbers for a World Cup regatta. But while successful sports like rowing have no problems attracting fans, when it comes to sponsors, well, it's a different story.
Into the record books!
With so much success, it should be an easy sell. Helen Glover and Heather Stanning won Team GB's first gold medal in what became a record-breaking games for Britain's rowers. And yet, 12 months on, Glover doesn't even have a personal sponsor.
My sights are firmly set on Rio, but when I think about beyond that, I have to start thinking realistically with my grown-up head on, thinking when am I going to start earning and when am I going to start saving some money? Because as it is, I'm, like I say, really lucky to be doing what I'm doing and doing it every day, but I need to get realistic about making, some sort of sensible living at some point.
Getting sponsorship has been a struggle for a number of the big Olympic sports. Rowing, sailing and athletics are all without a main commercial partner. One of the architects of the Games has been trying to drum up interest, but plans for a new sports marketing board have now been dropped.
If you looked at £1 billion-ish of corporate support during the Games, lead up to the Games, I'd be surprised if 5% of that, 10% maximum of that has materialised or continued post-game. So it's a very significant drop-off.
A lot of the Olympic sports hoped that what happened here in London last summer would lead to a real financial gold rush. Instead, a mix of economic uncertainty and hard-headed commercialism means that for many, it's tougher than ever before.
Aviva ended its deal with British Athletics last December after 13 years. So is it a fact of life that sports after the Olympics are not as attractive?
I think it's probably true. But so how do you solve that? You solve that by the sport itself showing actually how attractive it could be, and similarly recreating that sense of team and where that can go in the future.
From tomorrow night, the Olympic Stadium will be packed again for the anniversary Games. 1 year on, the challenge for sports like athletics is to turn the interest and goodwill from London 2012 into much bigger financial returns. David Bond, BBC News.
The Pope, who's on a week-long tour of Brazil, has visited one of Rio de Janeiro's many slums, or favelas as they're known. While there, he addressed thousands of people, calling on them to help put an end to social injustices. Well, our correspondent Wira Davis is in Rio for us now. Wira.
George, as you can probably hear and see, here on Copacabana Beach, hundreds of thousands of young Catholics have come to hear the new Pope, a pontiff who's already brought a distinctive change of style to the papacy. Perhaps unlike his predecessor, Pope Francis is obviously comfortable when he's in amongst his people. This favela or shantytown on the edge of Rio is the kind of place where the Catholic Church has lost ground in recent years to more charismatic evangelical churches, and where the Pope is determined to make amends.
No one can remain insensitive to the inequalities that persist in the world. Everybody should be able to make a personal contribution to putting an end to so many social injustices.
Just a block away from where the Pope spoke, Cleonice told me her home is flooded by sewage every time it rains heavily. The smell is unbearable, she says, and she hopes the Pope's visit might embarrass the authorities here into doing something. As many as 2 million young pilgrims have come to Rio, among them a small number from Britain. They're hoping to find a church that in the past may have been distracted by scandal and division, but is now prepared to engage with young people and tackle difficult issues head on.
And the church loves people, whatever sex, gender, sexuality.
In Francis, they see a pope who was dispensed with some of the trappings of high office and speaks to them directly.
He was just so simply dressed, and he just gave a wave and a smile, and also him going to visit the prisoners in prison and the disabled. All of these things have had such a big effect on me.
But not everyone here thinks the church is moving fast or far enough, especially on issues of sexuality.
The Archbishop was talking about that we don't discriminate, yet we're denied the ability to be who we are and to express who we are. And so really challenging the church to really rethink what it's teaching.
This is a hugely important moment for the Catholic Church in its heartland, and for this new Pope to make the most of so much goodwill. Now, of course, the Pope will address this crowd in the next couple of hours. There's huge expectation here about what he and the Church can do for this young generation. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. How well have you been sleeping for the last few nights? It might be the nighttime temperatures keeping you awake, but then again, it might have been Monday's full moon. For the first time, researchers have found a link between the lunar cycle and our sleep. Our science correspondent, Palab Ghosh, reports.
Strange things are supposed to happen when the moon is full. According to folklore, it's a time of madness and odd behaviour. And some people say they have trouble getting a good night's rest during a full moon. Now, for the first time, there's hard scientific evidence to suggest that it may actually disturb sleep patterns. Intriguingly, it's not down to the extra light. The most likely explanation, according to the researchers, is that somehow we're naturally attuned to the moon's cycles. Swiss researchers monitored the brains of volunteers at a sleep clinic similar to this one in Surrey. When they looked to see whether there was any link with the full moon, to their surprise, there was. The researchers found that on average, the volunteers fell asleep 5 minutes later, had 20 minutes less sleep, and crucially, had 30% less deep sleep, which the body needs to refresh itself.
It looks like this is the first ever story where there actually looks like a biological effect in human beings of the cycle of the moon, which obviously makes it very exciting on many levels.
The volunteers were in totally darkened rooms, so it wasn't the light of the moon that was affecting their sleep. So what was it?
We evolved on this planet at a time we didn't have clocks or calendars, and the moon was a time of celebration. You'd gone through another month, and therefore we actually had a party every full moon, and that over 1 million years led to an innate behaviour that we now, as a residual folk memory, have in our bodies.
More research will be needed, but the early indications are that perhaps there is a scientific basis to the myths of old. Palab Ghosh, BBC News.
Time for the weather now with Peter Gibbs. Hello.
Thanks, George. Add a crack of thunder to the things that have been keeping people awake over recent nights. And we've got to keep showers in the forecast for the next few days as well. But we mustn't lose sight of the fact there will equally be some warm sunshine in between. It will still feel largely like summer. Still some showers around this evening and overnight, though, across northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. They'll tend to rumble on in a few places, but much of England and Wales becoming dry through the latter part of the night. A little bit of mist here and there. Temperatures not dropping that much, actually, holding around about the mid-teens in most places. A rather cloudy start across many southern areas tomorrow, but that cloud will break up, and by and large for much of England and Wales it's a pleasant day. Generally dry, some sunny spells coming through, but once again the big heavy showers break out across a good part of Scotland and Northern Ireland by the time we get into the afternoon. Could be quite grey and misty as well around some northern and eastern coasts of Scotland. Always a chance of catching a shower, fairly slow moving. That'll be the case across Northern Ireland too, but you can see temperatures still getting up into the low 20s in between those showers in the sunshine, and probably the low to mid 20s across England and Wales, fresher than it has been across eastern areas certainly compared to today. As we head towards the southwest, might be a little bit of mist lingering around some of these south facing coasts, but it's south that we have to look to pick up the weather for the start of the weekend. We're expecting a big area of heavy rain to develop across Biscay, run up across northern France. There'll be some thunderstorms in the mix. I think we'll certainly see some of that rain pushing up across these southern parts of the UK during Saturday. A bit more difficult to pin down exactly where the heaviest thundery outbreaks will be, so stay tuned to the forecast. Otherwise, it's a mix of sunny intervals and showers elsewhere, but still reasonably warm with temperatures widely into the low 20s. A similar mix of sunny spells and showers for Sunday as well. Low 20s in the south, perhaps the high teens in the north, but still vaguely like summer, George, despite those showers over the next few days.
All right, Peter, thanks very much. Thank you. And that's all from the BBC's News at 6, so it's goodbye from me. And on BBC One, we can now join the BBC's news teams where you are.
Tonight on BBC London News. 1 year on and an Olympic boost for the East End. The Mayor announces millions of pounds worth of investment, including the UK's biggest indoor ski centre. But those living in the shadow of the Olympic Park question whether they'll feel the benefits. Also tonight. The teenager fatally shot in a case of mistaken identity. His twin brother, who was injured, hopes a reconstruction will help catch those responsible.
I heard the third shot, but I didn't know what had happened. But that shot grazed my arm. At the moment, at the time, I didn't know.
Plus, how the hot weather is blamed for killing thousands of fish in this East London river. And blue for a boy. We hear from the cabbie booked by royal appointment.
Kate's mum and dad? And he said, yeah, you'll be dropping them to Kensington Palace. I said, I know I'm going to Kensington Palace. I said, but I didn't know it was them.